Hey everyone, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Dalinda Gonzalez Alcantar and I am the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club in McAllen on the southern border, and I get the honor of being today's MC. I'm super excited to welcome you to the State of Latine Children Summit. We're really excited actually to offer our Spanish language interpretation for this event. And I know I'm going to go ahead, and I know there's more people that are heading in. So this event counts with the simultaneous interpretation tool, the English to Spanish. So Carlos is actually going to tell us a little bit about what that Spanish and English to Spanish language and vice versa. Actually, let me hit that off. So to go ahead and select your language for the Spanish language interpretation, you're going to click on the globe icon that you actually find on the lower menu. If you're connecting from a cell phone, you're going to go ahead and tap the screen to see the options, and then you're going to click on the plus sign symbol so you can see the interpretation option. But let us know if you have any trouble during the setup, so you can let us know on the chat and we can work through that as you go from your English to Spanish language interpretation. I know we have a lot of great people on our call today, and I just wanted to take a second, for those of you that are new, let you know that Children at Risk is a research and advocacy nonprofit that is leading the way in improving the quality of life for Texas children. Children at Risk considers the whole child by tracking issues in children's health, in safety, in education, and of course, economic security. They're committed to action beyond the data, which I love the most. Children at Risk drives evidence-based change by speaking out on behalf of children, and they have been a great resource for Boys and Girls Clubs here on the southern border and beyond. You can actually view today's agenda for the program, and you can actually also get to know our experts that are using the links dropped in the chat. So if you need any information as we walk through that, there'll be a ton of links that are dropped in the chat. But of course, also, if you have questions, you can submit them to the speakers using the Q&A function. And also after the event, just to let you know, if you're here and you registered, you'll actually receive the slide deck and any resources shared, as well as a link to watch the entire recording. So in case you're not able to get all of the notes down at this moment, know that you'll be receiving all of this great data and information. But of course, before we jump in completely, I would like to take a moment to thank everyone who made this day possible. Of course, we're going to start off with Jaritos. My daughter and I were actually talking about Jaritos. They are our engaged and generous sponsor for this event. And we made the decision that pineapple is our favorite flavor of Jaritos. You can go ahead and hit us up on the chat and let us know what your favorite Jaritos flavor is. Again, we were torn, but we went with pineapple as our absolute favorite Jaritos. So thank you again to Jaritos for generously sponsoring this event. And of course, last but never least, we have a ton of great orgs and community partners that we would not be able to do this without. So we do want to take a second and thank the Texas Family Leadership Council, the Texas Racial Equity Collaborative, the Santa Maria Hostel, Children's Defense Fund of Texas, Partnership for America's Children, Children Now, and IMMS Schools for your continued partnership in the work that we've been doing collectively over the years. Super cool. We're going to actually go ahead and kick off the summit. I'm really pleased to welcome Laila Meslahi, the director of the Center for Social Measurement and Evaluation at Children at Risk. She'll provide us with a really quick, brief look at the data landscape of the State of Latine Children. We're going to move through these really, really quickly. So remember, again, you're going to be getting these slide decks when you registered. Everyone will receive a copy. So don't really worry about taking super detailed notes. Laila, would you join us on camera, please?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Laila Mazzali, and as mentioned, I currently serve as the director of the Center for Social Measurement and Evaluation here at Children at Risk. So briefly, just before delving into the content of the presentation, I did want to take a second to note that while the summit is dedicated to Latine children, and the terms Hispanic and Latine or Latino are not always interchangeable, we've used them interchangeably just throughout this segment to maintain consistency with the terms that were used in the census, which we did use to gather the majority of the data that we'll be covering. So we can go ahead and dive in. In 2021, there were 62.5 million members of the Latina community in the United States. Of course, this number is a little bit higher now, and that accounts for approximately 19% of the total US population. In 1980, by contrast, members of this community made up just 7% of the total US population. So this growth really showcases a trend towards an increasingly diverse US population, though, of course, changes in some of the ways that the census recorded Latina identity questions in the past may account for some undercounting, meaning that the growth may not be quite as dramatic as it seems. Next slide, please. So here we can see that growth within the Latina community is largely attributable to an increase in established communities. So not necessarily a large influx of new migration. US-born children between the ages of 5 and 17 make up the largest share of Latina residents in the US. And this stands in juxtaposition with a steady decrease in the number of those who arrived in the US in more recent years. The share of the total Latina population who have been established in the US for 10 years or more continues to grow, and that accounts for almost 80% of the total population. Next slide. So the Latina population in the US trends exceptionally young. 53% of the Latina population who was born in the US is between the ages of 5 and 29. Those born abroad are growing older, and young US-born Latinas account for the large majority of the population's growth. So 63% of the Latina population is concentrated across just these 5 states, which largely mirrors the general population density that's present in these 5 states, with the exception of Arizona. Much of the Latina population is concentrated in metropolitan areas, which is possibly attributable to the availability of resources and community and urban hubs, but it also really points to the need for these cities and states to pay attention to disparities that may be present in accessing of basic needs and services, and the creation of structural solutions to address any inequities that may be present. So recent years demonstrate an all-time high for both post-secondary enrollment and tertiary educational attainment for members of the US Latina community. But while we've seen major growth in access to tertiary education, some disparities are still present. So while 35% of the general population holds a bachelor's degree or higher, only 20% of Latina adults have completed tertiary education. However, the growth showcased in the last slide in enrollment does show really promising trends, while disparities in completion rates point towards persisting barriers. But regardless, we continue to see sustained improvements in tertiary education access. Among Latinas ages 25 and older, 7% held a graduate degree as of 2021, and that was up from only 4% in the year 2000. So in addition to increases in educational attainment and enrollment in tertiary education, we also see increased Latina representation in elected governance, which partially mirrors the growth in general demographics. And while we see a steady growth in these areas, continued work does need to be done at the municipal, state, and federal level to ensure continued advancements in equity for Latina individuals across the US. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I'm having a little bit of trouble getting my camera back on, but we'll move along because I'm actually really excited to introduce our first panel discussion of the day. So our first panel will explore the topic of health and shed some light on some of the biggest challenges that are facing our Latina children in accessing care and, of course, health outcomes. Moderating this discussion today is going to be Lindsay Wilkerson, our very own Lindsay Wilkerson. She is the Director of Health and Special Projects at Children at Risk. Lindsay will be joined in the discussion by Dr. Norma Olvera. She is the Professor of Psychology, Health, and Learning Science Department at the University of Houston. We'll also be joined by Dr. Alejandra Fernandez. She is the Assistant Professor of the UT Health Houston School of Public Health. And Gabriela Barbosa. She's the Managing Director of Policy at the Children's Partnership. And again, there's going to be so much great information in this panel. So as a reminder, you can learn more about the guest speakers today using the link that is dropped in the chat. And with that, Lindsay, take it away.
Thank you, Delinda. Good morning, everyone. So to get started on our health discussion, there's a number of efforts that have been employed over the decades to address health outcomes in Latinos. However, a number of disparities remain. It's important that healthcare policies and programs are inclusive of diverse Latinx communities, considering factors like language, immigration status, and cultural beliefs. We have a great panel today who's going to delve into this a little bit more. So we'll get started with Dr. Olvera. What are some of the most pressing health challenges that Latinx children face today, and how have these challenges evolved in recent years?
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to always talk about or having a voice for the Hispanic or Latino community. So before I start my presentation, I just wanted to, based on my bio, you can see that I will be speaking or wearing two hats as I speak. One is I'm the president of the Hispanic Health Coalition, which we are basically working a lot with the community. And the other hat that I will be wearing is as a University of Houston researcher who has been doing research for 25 years. Oh, my Lord, time goes so fast. Anyway, so when we examine the health of the Latino children in the United States, and for any same matter, for any child in the United States, we need to take into consideration really the context in which they live. I know somebody's going to talk about the social determinants, but I just wanted to cite a recent study published by Harvard researcher, Dr. Natalie Slopin, that was just published. And what she found, it was a national sample, almost 18 children, Latino children, ages 3 and 17, from the National Survey of Children's Health. And it was conducted just before the COVID, was conducted between 2006 and 2020. And what they found was that among Latino children who live in the United States, who live in states in which there are harsher laws that apply to immigrants and systemic prejudice against them, they were more likely to experience mental health and chronic physical health conditions. So in addition to that, I think that within the context, especially nowadays, we need to consider, the COVID impact, the COVID-19 epidemic impact on Latino families, in particular the children, and also other natural disasters that happen in Houston from Harvey. So all these things create a context in which we need to analyze the impact that had our Latino children. I was going to talk a lot about the statistics, so I will skip that because the first presenter did that. I do want to point it out to the group that they allowed the research and the data that she presented, and I was going to present. It comes from the Pew Research Center. So it's a very good, reliable place to gather data. The thing that I will add, and she mentioned, so I'm going to reinforce it, that the Latinos for a long time, this is not new, for a long time, the Latino, I would say since 1990, we see the trend that we have a lot of young Latinos and we have constantly that, a lot more children and also younger children. So about 1/3, so just to give you an idea, about 1/3 or 17 million of the national Hispanic population is younger than 18 years of age. And about 1/4 of, or 14.6 million of all the Hispanic are millennials. And not just about the area of health, but everyone is looking at those numbers. You know, they also show, for instance, right now it's showing data that Latinos children and youth are more likely to use TikTok. They rely a lot on social media and TikTok. Okay, so there are also trends that we have seen for a long time in terms of the health status. And our specific, because of the time I only have 4 minutes, our specific target 3 different areas that you can see health disparities between Latino children and other children. One is obviously obesity is number 1. And also now we start seeing, especially after COVID, a lot of food scarcity. So I will talk to you a little bit more about our experience. The other area that I want to talk about, because it's becoming more and more prevalent, and it has a connection with obesity and other illnesses, it's also the mental health aspect. Anxiety is becoming a major issue in our children, and untreated anxiety, which is even worse. So that's one of the major issues. I wanted to very quickly to give you, we did a summer program for low-income children in the summer, and we always talk about how food or lack of food affect the learning. And I cannot tell you, the children that we were working with, children who were relying on pantry food to feed them. So the program was in the community, in a community center, and we start noticing the children would throw away the food. And when we asked them, why you are not eating? Oh, and then about 1 o'clock, they were so hungry, they were irritable, they didn't want to do anything, they just wanted to sleep, basically falling asleep. So we started asking them, why you are not eating? And she said, because the food's terrible. I mean, who wants to eat that food? Anyway, so what we started thinking about is also, it was very clearly like, it's the difference between knowing about something and actually visualize the change of the children's mood after not eating for an amount of hours. It was clear, and that affects their learning, but also affects obviously their health. And then a lot of them would bring chips or things, a snack that they were Tukis or Takis, that they was very unhealthy, but they will eat it during that time. A lot of the children also, we found they were very anxious, and also there was a lot of bullying and things that they were reporting within their community. So that also, in addition to that, the other content that happened, especially during COVID and after COVID, is a lot of the family members, especially the father, for instance, lost their job or got sick. And that also, or they were working in jobs in which they're more prone to construction, they're more prone to injury. And so the father stopped working, so the mother will start working more, or, you know, there were issues about food, consistency of food in the house. So all those major areas are affecting the health of the Latinos. But also what I want to point it out, where there are things that probably will not be new to you. One aspect that we see constantly in the community is about the difference between sometimes the beliefs, the cultural beliefs, and how to put it in a context within this medical community, how they can work together. So I'm going to give you some examples. So one of the things that we ask mothers sometimes we get in our program referrals from the medical, like hospital. And very often we hear mothers say, you know, my child, the doctor told me is obese, but he doesn't get sick. She or he is doing well, she runs and all these things. So I don't understand what the problem with obesity is. And sometimes they said, the doctor told me he has a BMI of X. I don't know what it means. I don't know what BMI means. So there's a disconnect between informing and I completely understand the medical system doesn't have enough time to explain. But what I'm saying is we have put it in a way that the mind can understand. So the way that we did it was, okay, let me explain. It might not look sick externally, but internally things are happening. And the other aspect I want to tap into that is also we typically see a community, X community, seeing all the barriers and problems, but also we don't see the assets. So I will give you some example of how we tackle in our program some of the assets. For instance, we did research, start looking for some of the food that they are very healthy within the Hispanic community that we are losing as they immigrate or live here for second or third generation. So an example I'm going to give you is the hibiscus water. The hibiscus water or agua de Jamaica is actually pretty healthy, but in our programs, sometimes we don't even talk about that, or tamarind water, or certain ways to modify some of the recipes to give them more acceptance within the family about the food. So thinking about also as we deal with the Hispanic children is also looking at the assets that they have within the family support. Sometimes they are very adaptable given all the challenges that they have and the reaction to the community when they experience discrimination or other environmental contexts. So I will stop there. Do I have more time, Lindsay? So I went over my time.
We're going to move on, but we'll circle back to you after we go to our other speakers. Thank you for that. And that's great, all the culturally tailored interventions that you mentioned and how those can make a difference as well. We're going to move on to Gabriella. There's a lot of work that y'all have been doing at the Children's Partnership supporting health in California. Could you discuss some of the policy initiatives that you are currently working on that are addressing health disparities amongst Latinx children in California? And what successful models have you seen that we can learn from?
Sure. Thank you so much, Lindsay. And thank you for inviting me and the Children's Partnership to be part of this panel. The Children's Partnership, we are based in California. We are a children's advocacy organization advancing child health equity through public policy, research, and community education on behalf of children from historically marginalized communities, including Latina children. I identify as Latina, so this work is very near and dear to my heart. So I want to talk about 5 different solutions that we see as promising and that we're advocating for at the Children's Partnership. One is really the need for disaggregated data to really understand where health inequities exist within Latina children. I'll give you an example using data from California. So in California, over half of our state's 9 million children identify as Latina. That's 4.6 million. But within that group, Latina children identify with different races and ethnicities. 43,000 identify as Indigenous Latina children. 37,000 identify as Black and Latina. Almost 4,000 identify as Pacific Islander and Latina. 2.3 million identify as white and Latina. And over 600,000 identify as mixed race, so Latina and another race. And so using this data, it's really important to understand that this community is not a monolithic group, that within Latina children, there are many different identities and experiences and challenges. And so one thing that we're pursuing and supporting our partners on is advocating for our state departments that collect data on Latina children, including our Department of Public Health, Department of Healthcare Services, to disaggregate data within the Latina community to be able to, again, really see where those health inequities exist within groups of children in the Latina community and create targeted interventions within the group. Second, I would like to talk about poverty and food insecurity. Poverty and food insecurity is an issue and challenge that really is impacting Latina children in our state. And there are 2 sort of promising solutions that I really want to uplift here. One, I know everybody's been talking about the child tax credits. The expansion of the child tax credits really lifted up Latina children out of poverty in our state. We also have state-funded child tax credits that are available to undocumented Latina children, really providing specific cash and resources where Latina families choose to decide how to spend that money. That is very promising and uplifting families from poverty. Another policy we're pursuing is around food access. So our state funded food assistance program is called the California Food Assistance Program. Right now, we're part of a campaign where we're discussing strategies to really expand that program to include undocumented children in our state. In California, when we look at the children that are experiencing food insecurity, nearly 70% of non-citizen children in our state are experiencing food insecurity, and most of them do not have access to our state-funded food benefits program. So really trying to open that up for them as well. Another promising program I wanted to talk about are something called Hope accounts in California. COVID-19 had a disastrous impact on children and youth in our state, and still continues to impact them. Over 44,000 children in California lost a primary parent or caregiver due to COVID-19. Those children don't have adults to rely on anymore. And of those children, over half of them identify as Latinx, nearly 30,000. So one promising policy that we supported last year from our partners, something called Hope accounts, which essentially will give trust fund accounts, will create trust accounts for youth and foster youth who have lost primary caregivers due to COVID-19, including Latinx children. And that work is going on right now through a working group. And once those children turn 18, they will have access to funds from that account where they will be able to use for education, housing, anything that they'd like. Something else that is really promising around mental health, Dr. Olvera mentioned the mental health challenges that Latina children and youth are facing. That is very, very much prominent in California. When we look at the data specifically by gender and ethnicity, we see that Latinas in particular are facing some of the highest rates of depression, feeling hopeless, and also facing some of the highest rates of not being able to access mental health services and therapy. And so one program that we're really excited about that we're starting in California is a peer-to-peer program, a pilot that's meant to start peer-to-peer programs on 8 different high schools on California campuses where peers can provide mental health supports to other peers. We've seen through research and our work that some of the most promising interventions come from community members themselves, come from youth themselves, and are led by youth themselves. And peer-to-peer programs are an example of programs that really utilize youth power, youth experience to support the mental health of their own peers and friends. And that is the same within the Latinx community. And then one other one that I wanted to mention is just the power of a community health workforce. Promotoras are incredible. And do so much incredible work here in California, really supporting Latina families and other families from historically marginalized communities. And right now in California, we have a brand new benefit in our state Medicaid program that will utilize and reimburse community health workers and promotoras to provide services to people enrolled in Medi-Cal, including youth. And we're very excited about that as well.
Thank you, Gabriela. It's amazing to hear about all the work that you all are doing and to be able to look to the success that we're seeing in other states as you're continuing to move the needle on some of these challenges that we still see. Up next is Dr. Fernandez. She's going to talk a little bit about the Hispanic paradox. So this has long been an interest to researchers, and now armed with new data and tools, what can you tell us about the Hispanic paradox and what challenges this presents in public health programs?
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay, for the invitation to speak and for the opportunity to answer this question. So the Hispanic paradox essentially suggests that Hispanic individuals fare better than non-Hispanic white individuals. Oh, and I can answer the question without the slides, so it's fine. So it suggests that immigrants start off healthier because they haven't acculturated to the mainstream culture. They still hold these protective cultural values, such as a strong sense of family and community. They eat healthier, and they haven't acculturated to maybe like the fast food diet that we are used to here in the US. However, we start to see that this paradox starts to decrease or dissipate when we start to generalize across the entire US Hispanic Latinx population, because the Hispanic population itself is changing traditionally through what we have seen across the decades. So historically, like Leila mentioned, the Hispanic growth has been driven by immigration, but we see that now most of the US Hispanic is starting to be more US born. And so they are not growing up with this immigrant mentality. And so you see that the Hispanic paradox is not even particularly true among some Hispanic adolescents who fare worse in outcomes such as obesity, like Dr. Olvera mentioned, alcohol use before the age of 13, feeling sad or hopelessness, not engaging in physical activity. So they do actually fare worse. than their non-Hispanic white counterparts. So we have to be really careful when we're using the Hispanic paradox to explain certain outcomes, because it can put children and adolescents or other populations at a disadvantage for available programming if it's perceived that they don't actually need it because of the Hispanic paradox. So just being careful how we use that and how we pitch it and how others use it in different spaces.
Thank you. I think that's such an important thing to keep in mind as we're thinking about policy and programming, as you mentioned, is how we're using this data to be able to frame and support those initiatives and making sure that it is being mindful of some of those considerations that you mentioned. Dr. Oliveira, what role can the community organizations and coalitions play in advocating for better health outcomes for Latinx children?
That's excellent question. And I think, obviously, I'm biased, but I do think we play a tremendous role. First, at different levels. So I would just, at the level of getting in touch with the community and the partnerships that we have directly to the community and listen to them. So it's so hearing what are the main concerns and then bringing some of this concern to a higher level. So, and there is still more work that we can do and better. But I would tell you a couple of things that we have. So the Hispanic Health Coalition does an annual, and it has been for 17 years. We do what is called the Get Out and Moving, and we provide not only screening vaccinations. That's part, but we do a lot of we do interviews with some of the families attending. We also do a family walk. We also have doctors that they can talk to families about the main issues or the major issues, and also we start seeing patterns in the community in terms of health. So I'll give you an example. For instance, before we really saw parents talking to us about diabetes, type 2 diabetes in their children, that they are being diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic. Really hear parents talking to us, now it's more common, about fatty kidney and trying to ask us, what does it mean, So that's one of the aspects. And then concerns about access to healthcare. Transportation is number one, and also accessibility, even if they have the insurance for the children to go to the, here in Houston, we have the best medical center, but you make it to the right building at the right time, it's a miracle. So they want more community-based clinics. So that's one of the things. The other thing that we advocate, we see also the numbers of underrepresentation of Latinos in the leadership position from the City of Houston Health Department all the way to medical school. Just another statistics that will shock you, for dietitians, for instance, or health educators, but dietitians specifically, there are only 8% nationally of dietitians who are Hispanic. 8%. And the same thing, you see the numbers for medical school, and the ability. So one of the things that the Hispanic health community, we are really focusing on providing a scholarship for even high school students who are pursuing a career in health. Because number one, that we have found excuse for not going into either medical school, even they had the grades, is because of money. So we are trying to start early in high school, providing them. The other aspect is also having summits. I started the summit for the Hispanic Health Coalition in 2013. And we first gathered all the speakers were Latinos, because we wanted to promote our Latino community, that we have professionals. So we start doing that. Now we're expanding, and it's for everyone, but bring people together to talk about the issues, to talk to the City of Houston, for instance, Health Department director, and say, we asked them, some of the questions we asked, I was like, tell me in the leadership position, how many Hispanics you have? And start making them think, oh, okay, you're right, we need more representation. So I will start by saying that the advocacy could be in the promotion of Latinos in leadership position, and careers in which we are completely underrepresented. And the other thing is the pulse of the community.
Thank you for that. And that's something that we'll delve into later on in the summit. I know there's a whole discussion that's going to be on representation. Gabriella, moving on. I know you mentioned some of the key policy changes that y'all are looking at in California to improve the healthcare system and access. Can you discuss a few of those key policies, and then also what ways can schools or educational institutions contribute to the overall health and well-being of Latinx children?
Thanks, Lindsay. Because I talked about the solutions earlier, I'll focus on the second part of the question around schools. I think schools have an incredible role to play in supporting the health and well-being of Latina children and youth in our state and in our country. One of the promising practices that's happening right now in California is there is a huge initiative called the Children Youth Behavioral Health Initiative, which essentially is creating an infrastructure to partner managed care plans that deliver Medicaid, Medi-Cal services to children and youth who are enrolled in Medi-Cal, mostly lower income, at schools specifically. And creating partnerships between managed care plans and those school sites to be able to do that. And that's a really exciting thing. Getting reimbursed for Medicaid services, particularly if you're a school or school district, is something that can be very challenging and difficult. And this program is really trying to provide technical assistance and create the infrastructure and funding that's actually needed to create those partnerships. So we're very excited about that. We also, at the Children's Partnership, we have a partnership right now with the Los Angeles Unified School District around the public health emergency unwinding and making sure that children do not lose their Medi-Cal because of the renewals that families are going through right now. And it's really important. We've developed a lot of materials, we've developed videos, and through this partnership, LAUSD will be sharing the message to all of their families, and they have a community of over 600,000 people. So schools are a really important way to reach families, particularly around information that they could use to get health coverage, access health services as well.
Thank you. And I'm sure I'm not the only one, but we would love to see those resources if you have anything that you can share on the work that you all are doing on some of those programs that you mentioned. Dr. Fernandez, can you discuss the current challenges that you face in researching health outcomes for the Latinx population, and what are some of those best practices that you use to address those issues?
Yeah, so there's a lot of challenges that I face, but they're challenges that I'm happy to tackle because I love doing this work in this population, my population. So some of the major challenges, and I think we touched on this a little bit, is getting the trust of this population, getting them to trust you and to connect with you. It helps that I maybe look and speak like them, but a lot of people at my level in academia don't really look or speak like I do. And so I take a lot of onus and a lot of responsibility to do the work. When participants want to be in my research and participate in my studies, I have to make myself available to their hours. I work 9 to 5, but they also work 9 to 5. So I try really hard to talk to them or text them in the afternoon, in the weekends, whenever they're available, whenever they get home from work, whenever they're done with dinner for their family and things like that. And then also tearing some of the barriers down to participation involves getting in, Dr. Alvera also mentioned this, Gabriela has mentioned this, making these partnerships with community organizations that already do this work in the community and that the community members trust these organizations. One of the first steps that I take whenever I enter a space, reach out to community organizations, see what services they have available and how I can best serve that community through that community organization versus kind of like imposing my agenda in that community. And then at the scientific level, I think there's a lot of work that can be done. A lot of it is as simple as providing resources and interventions in a language that this population speaks and is comfortable with. That's like the bare minimum. And then we see a lot less like culturally adapted resources and interventions. It's not easy because the Latinx population is very diverse and heterogeneous, even within our own population. And so there's a lot of cultures, a lot of different practices that we can integrate into interventions. but it's definitely an important step to take if you want to get that buy-in, if you want to do make those changes, see those changes in health outcomes.
Thank you so much. It seems that was a running theme through the panel, is to make sure that you have the voice of the community at the table in the work that you're doing. I appreciate all of you joining us this morning. Unfortunately, we are all out of time, but thank you so much for such a great discussion.
Yes, again, thank you to Dr. Olvera, Dr. Fernandez, and Gabriela. You know, that again, Lindsay, that's so important. I know that Dr. Fernandez ended by touching on that, you know, a oneness with community, reaching out to community partners. I think it's also super important when you're working in Latine, you know, communities, to make sure that there's someone within your group or org that speaks the primary language of the home. And I know Gabriela also touched on prometoras, really having buy-in from the neighborhood leadership. We all have, you know, neighbors that are the ones that give out information and valuable information. So thank you so much. That was an extremely valuable panel. You know, I do want to remind everybody again, I know I was trying to write down a few things as Dr. Fernandez was speaking, but I want to remind everyone that we can learn about our guest speakers on the link, and then also remember that you will be receiving the slide deck after this. So again, thank you so much for that conversation. You guys, we're going to actually have a 5-minute break. So we will head back and resume at 10:47. So we'll see you guys again here in just a bit. All right, I hope everybody got their cafecito. That's what I did during my break. And we are going to move forward with a panel that I'm really, really excited about. So this discussion is going to be about the landscape after the end of affirmative action. So I'd like to introduce our next session, Landscape After the End of Affirmative Action. This session will actually discuss what the recent Supreme Court decision on affirmative action means for our children. It will address the hurdles in advocating for policies that promote equal opportunities and dismantle systematic barriers while also facing continuing challenges at the state level to all of the work that I know all of us are involved in, our DEI work. Moderating this discussion is actually going to be Linda Corchado. She is the director of the Children's Immigration Network with our very own Children at Risk. And joining her, of course, for this conversation will be Ginny Walker. She is the executive director of Ed Trust Tennessee. And we're really excited about Paige Dugans-Clay. She is the chief legal analyst of IDRA. So you guys, if you could please join us on camera to start this great discussion. And again, I know we're all taking notes, but be mindful that all of this will be sent over to you. So Linda, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Delinda. I feel like we're tocayas a little bit. Thank you all for being here. I'm super excited about this because the Supreme Court is just one of my favorite topics. So I'll just give a quick intro and then give it over to our panelists. Recently in a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court in June of last year actually invalidated both Harvard and UNC's affirmative action programs on the grounds that they illegally discriminate on the basis of race and the Equal Protection Clause. Personally, affirmative action opened the doors for my success. As a Mexican American, a daughter of field workers, I had a lot of catching up to do with my own peers. But I had a high school counselor who believed in me, saw my talent, and helped me get into one of the best liberal art colleges in the nation. Then in law school in New York City, I remember discussing with one of my very few Latinas at that school about affirmative action. At the time, we were gushing, as all fangirls do, of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Justice Ginsburg spoke on gender discrimination and said, "I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks." And on the basis of race, I felt the same. And I, along with so many Latina students, still feel the same way. Even as Texas, almost to the date of the 1-year anniversary of that Supreme Court decision, signs SB 17 into law, a bill aimed at dismantling diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI, offices and programs in higher education. This is the situation that we find ourselves in now. So I have a question for you, Jeannie. Can you address the significance of affirmative action in higher education and its role in addressing disparities in educational opportunities for Latina students? And how might this decision impact these students seeking higher ed opportunities?
Thank you, Linda, for the invitation. It's great to be with all of you. I am zooming in from Nashville, Tennessee, but grateful to be here today. So I just want to start by reiterating that what we all know to be true, that access to post-secondary education or credential, including from selective colleges and universities, such as the case with the SCOTUS decision, is an essential pathway for economic achievement and social mobility. And we know that so many, our parents, my father, came to this country for the express purpose of ensuring their children were educated and had access to all of the things we know that lead to economic mobility. But we also know that students who graduate with post-secondary degrees are much more likely in their careers to be in positions of leadership, whether that's as leaders in companies, nonprofits, in the private sector, public sector. So when we see an effort to dismantle opportunities and pathways for students into post-secondary, we know it will be reflected in the long term in positions of leadership and decision makers where we know it's essential. I think this Supreme Court ruling is an essential example of that, right? The lack of sort of the voices of our communities on the Supreme Court. We know the numbers, right? That Latino students are less likely to be enrolled and graduating from post-secondary institutions. Nationally, the average is similar to population, but in unique states like Tennessee, those numbers don't mirror the national average at all, where we don't have access in many states to in-state tuition and so forth. So we already see barriers to enrollment beyond a SCOTUS decision like this that's so harmful. And so what we hope to see right out of this is that our communities rally and that they begin to think of ways to support our students who are more likely to be first gen. 70% of Latino students are first gen, meaning their parents have not received a post-secondary degree. So they're less likely to have that support at home. So we know now that college counselors, admissions folks, folks working in communities are going to have to go the extra mile to make sure students are including a full picture of who they are in their applications to post-secondary. We know that lots of students just don't have that coaching, that they attend high schools. Our students are attending high schools with less access to advanced coursework, and higher ratios of counselors to students. So this decision is harmful, and it just exacerbates what we know to be true as far as challenges students are already facing. It's heartbreaking to see, to assume that the Supreme Court is assuming that we can just remove race from the equation, as though race is not a factor in every element of public education in our country. So I want to also acknowledge that the attacks on DEI are another really important way that we will diminish access for our students. And once they get in, likelihood of success, right? Likelihood of success of faculty of color, of Latino faculty, because these programs and these cuts and this climate is less likely to create an environment that's welcoming and conducive to our students. So as someone who works in an advocacy organization, we know now that is the time to step up, empower students to raise their voices about these decisions, about processes and practices at institutions, and really try to inhibit sort of the expansion of what the ruling really said.
Right, that's the goal. And I mean, this must be such new territory for high school seniors now, not sure what their future is going to be. This is going to be certainly a very difficult experience for that new incoming class. And you also set up the stage for the DEI question that I have for Paige, so thank you. Paige, how do the recent changes in Texas regarding DEI departments in universities relate to the broader national discourse surrounding DEI efforts in higher ed? And what are the implications, not just for Latina students in Texas, but across the country?
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. And thank you to Children at Risk for the opportunity to be here today. IDRA and Children at Risk have a lot in common in terms of our shared missions of putting children first, looking at children from the whole child. And our mission for 50 years now has really been focused on that K through 12 pipeline and ensuring equal and equitable access to higher education. And so critically important for our work, and I'm grateful for all y'all do. And I want to be very clear, as tragic and disappointing and also predictable, right, as the Supreme Court's decision in SFFA was, nothing in the Supreme Court's opinion stops colleges and universities from considering a student's race in terms of their particularized experiences, right? So in terms of their adversity or opportunity, their inspiration, their volunteer work. And that's a message that we as advocates and as communities, we have to get that out to our youth. And unfortunately, you're right, Linda and Jenny, absolutely the work that the Texas legislature unfortunately did last session is connected to these broader attacks on equitable educational opportunity. We really saw two pieces of legislation, the primary one being SB 17, passed explicitly outlining offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion in public institutions of higher education. We've already seen that the really negative impacts of that policy on our state schools. We've seen offices shuttered. These are spaces where students from all kinds of backgrounds and faculty and staff of all kinds of backgrounds feel safe, welcomed, receive critical support and resources. So we're monitoring that very carefully, and we want to be very clear, make no mistake, the same operatives that are really pushing for this race-blind or orientation to law and policy are the same forces at work in Texas. The same national groups that are pushing that really harmful litigation are at play in the Texas policy landscape. And we as a community, regardless of our backgrounds, our political affiliations, our racial and ethnic identities, right? We all have to come together in defense of our kids. And this is especially true for our Latina population, right? The way that these special interests and operatives have been able to force these really harmful policies through the courts and through the legislatures has been through driving wedges in communities of color, right? By holding up and perpetuating false myths, and really undermining the evidence-based strategies we know that work to promote, higher education access and equitable educational opportunities. So for us, these issues of DEI in higher education through SB 17 and other policies, attacks on affirmative action, are an attack on all of us and our economy, our families, and our communities. And schools must continue to hold true to their constitutional and legal obligations, and frankly, their moral obligations to educate all children and all students, regardless of their background.
Thank you. And I mean, I really appreciate how you started your comments, which was about student experience, because I feel that when the Supreme Court decision came out, it almost said your experience in this country does not matter at all. It is completely irrelevant. And so I know a lot of high school counselors are telling their students now, get that experience in your essay, make sure that you highlight your volunteer experiences, just like you said, so that you continue to show that your experience matters and that schools should really consider it. But it also shows the dark side of it, the kind of negativity and impact that so many students must have thought when they heard maybe it doesn't matter. So thank you for that insight. And Jeannie, in light of these recent decisions, what challenges do you anticipate in the recruitment and retention, not just of Latinx students, but also faculty and staff?
So I want to start by, I'm wondering if I can put something in the chat too. It looks like I can, never mind. I'll try later. I was going to reference a report that the Education Trust put out called Segregation Forever in 2020. So as an advocacy organization, we know we always track the data. We're paying attention to the data. It's going to be more true than ever that we do that because we are going to see numbers change, right? We anticipate numbers changing. We anticipate more students perhaps going to HSIs. We anticipate more students defaulting to institutions that they foresee as perhaps more welcoming to them, as opposed to, thank you, I think that's my partner, Alexa, who posted that for us. Institutions that might perhaps be more welcome to them, but may not be the right fit, right? May not be the most rigorous, challenging, ambitious choice they would have made. And so what we have to do is continue to push for students and folks that serve these students to apply and to have full applications that paint a full picture. And as we're tracking enrollment and attainment, completion at institutions, we have to pay attention to where we see numbers dropping off. We have to examine why. We have to challenge institutions on their practices, but we also have to look at the high school experience that students are having. I want to quote Justice Sotomayor in her dissent on the ruling, where she said, "Ignoring race will not equalize a society that is racially unequal. What was true in the 1860s and again in 1954 is true today. Equality requires an acknowledgement of inequality." And so as an organization that really lifts up the data, the evidence, the practices to close gaps, to address these gaps, we have to all be paying attention to what's happening as this ruling is being interpreted in each state. So in Tennessee, our Attorney General has already called for a complete examination and listing of funding of any racially based programs, scholarships. And so we see a complete overreach, right, into funding Black STEM programs, Latina leadership programs. I mean, scholarships for example, we have one in Tennessee called the Minority Teacher Fellowship Program to recruit teachers of color. Those things could go away. This is where we have to really dig deeply on how we expand our voices and make sure those things are protected. I think the other thing we have to do is encourage states to fund at higher rates institutions that serve more Latino students, students of color, low-income students. California just passed an important law that provides more investments to community colleges where we know most of our students are attending. They should have access to rigorous programming, lots of staff that can support them in their trajectory through college. And that should be more true than ever now, right? That we should be enforcing states, calling on states to invest in the institutions that serve most of our students. And we also know that these policies, these rulings, these laws actually have a profound impact. We saw it in California when they barred race-conscious admissions in 1996. Latino student enrollment dropped by half after that at Berkeley and UCLA. So it will be a real and tangible result that we have to be prepared to push back on and to challenge. So I encourage folks to really pay attention to policies and practices, what state legislatures are doing in response to the ruling, and seeing it as a pathway to really minimizing funding and support for our students.
I wonder if philanthropic efforts will also be impacted, but I mean, is there an upswing here? Do you think, Jeannie, maybe more will feel like they have to step up where other institutions may be failing?
I think it's possible, right? We're going to have to call on philanthropy to be courageous in this moment and really live into their diversity and inclusion and equity sort of principles that they espouse, and really show where they're going to prioritize making sure that we are funding organizations, they're funding organizations, that are serving these students in communities. And providing scholarships and providing all the things we know are necessary for advocacy groups, for youth voice movements, to make sure all voices are heard in this moment.
Thank you, Jeannie. Paige, my fellow attorney, are there any potential legal challenges or efforts to reverse either of these terrible policy changes? How do you see that?
Yeah, Linda, unfortunately, I think the opposite is true, is that the same special interest groups, specifically, Edward Blum, who is the operative, who's been, really coordinating attacks on foundational civil rights, which range from affirmative action and go to the voting rights cases, right? This is all deeply connected, an attack on civil rights, and education being a core one of those. So unfortunately, we're really seeing additional efforts to further reverse historic gains in terms of our civil rights. We're seeing attacks on, efforts to do equity in the K-12 space, right? Race neutral policies. We continue to stand in solidarity with many other groups and to believe firmly that our Constitution permits the consideration of race as a factor in terms of how we support students as a laudable and important goal to achieve true equal educational opportunity. And so we're confident that those efforts will be beaten back. But unfortunately, they're really, really powerful groups really pushing us in the opposite direction. But I don't want to be a doomsayer, Linda. I do want to talk about, some of the good things. I think the courts just frankly are a difficult place right now for civil rights advocates, but ordinary people, the leaders of our schools, our policymakers, and ordinary people, students, families, and community advocates really can make a difference. And I really want to start at the beginning. The bottom line is the reason that affirmative action has been such a critically important policy for our institutions of higher education is because of this deep history of segregation, of racism against Latina, Black, and other systemically marginalized groups. And we continue to see the impacts of that across the system, including in our public schools, right? And so one of the ways that we can continue to combat these efforts is to strengthen our public schools, right? To make sure that every child has access to high quality K-12 education, to pre-K, to all of the wonderful support and resources that position youth to be their best, most excellent selves, that in high school, they have access, right, to counselors who are not overburdened with administrative responsibilities, who can meet their needs, that they are not tracked out, right, of opportunities to attain and access really, really important professional and post-secondary opportunities, and that they're not pushed out of our schools, right, through harmful school to prison pipeline and exclusionary discipline policy. So those are things that ordinary people, school leaders, parents, community advocates can work in their communities to hold local schools accountable for. And then, of course, on the higher ed side, Linda, this is really personal to me too, not only as a person who's benefited from having these amazing supports, both in school and applying to it. I have an 18-year-old son who right now is working on his applications. He's a Latino young person, and needs a page. How do I talk about this? This is really important. The context of me being, a Mexican-American student in Texas has really shaped it. And so I'm going through that myself. And so we have to continue to support young people, to mentor them, to tutor them, and to support them in telling their stories and affirming their stories. And those are things, again, that ordinary people can do, and that our policymakers, state level policymakers, school board leaders, and local school leaders can do and invest resources in. So I just want to encourage us not to give up hope, because our youth are our future and we really can support them.
Thanks for sharing those experiences, Paige. And I have one final question for both of you, because, one here at Children at Risk, we really love data. So anything we can get our hands on to better understand the situation really helps illuminate the policy areas, especially. But Gina, you mentioned California. I'm curious, are there any lessons or data that we can learn from these states that already discontinued affirmative action in college admissions? And how can we learn from those experiences? How can this inform future legal challenges or even policies? Because I know California got it wrong, but maybe they're still on the upswing.
I don't know that I can point to a specific policy or state. I do think there are efforts like in Texas, right, where you take the top 10% of students, regardless of income, race, at every high school, for example. I think there are other ways to get at diversity in recruitment and admissions. I think it has to be coupled, though, with very conscious efforts at recruitment. Which high schools are you going to talk to students? So how are you communicating and talking about college? How are you translating materials? How are you making sure you're reaching and being innovative in reaching communities to ensure folks have access to information, accurate information about the process, the possibilities, the potential that come with access to higher ed degrees. I think it depends on the state climate, depends on what's possible. I think we have to be nimble in thinking about how we counter some of the movement that we're seeing before us. And I want to just close by saying, I think the most effective advocates at this moment are students. And college students need to get organized. High school students need to get organized, learn how to testify, learn how to speak to legislators and decision makers, to make sure that their stories are heard, that the impact of these decisions are how they are personally affecting them.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And it just shows how much responsibility colleges now have, right? To send out recruiters, really go to those areas that may not be represented as well as they should be in their universities. So the responsibility lies with everybody. But I mean, I love that last point. It's also about kids and their voice. Paige, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share on that?
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to point out just a couple of resources in terms of, what can we do from a policy standpoint, from a practice standpoint, to support youth and families, accessing higher education. First, the Department of Education released a Q&A that actually walks through several scenarios and answers a lot of the misconceptions around the breadth of this ruling. This ruling was actually really narrowly tailored, right, to the particular admissions programs at Harvard and UNC, which are elite institutions, right, highly competitive. And there are many of those across the nation and in Texas, but there are lots of other great institutions also. And so if you're looking for guidance and the Department of Education's interpretation, really recommend you take a look at it. It's a great piece of guidance. I also wanted to uplift the really great work of LDF, which issued a report talking about sort of the history and context, and also offering some recommendations around how we can continue to support students and families achieving equity in higher education. So I wanted to flag those two things. And lastly, I guess I'll just close with this. This is the moment to continue to stay vigilant. Texas has been at the epicenter of equal educational opportunity and civil rights for decades, right? Going all the way back to Heman v. Sweat, right, which was one of the inaugural cases leading to Brown versus Board, challenging racial segregation at my alma mater, UT School of Law. UT continuing to be the focus of this conversation through the two Fisher cases, through Hopwood, right? These are all landmark civil rights cases that have to do with the practice of using race in admissions. And we know that fight is not going anywhere. So we have to continue being in solidarity with one another across all of our communities. We have to continue investing in the evidence-based practices we know work that support students in K through 12 education, that honor and authenticate their lived experiences and translate that into their merit and their potential in higher education. And then we have to keep them there. And that's critically important also. And so I'm looking forward to working with many of you out in the field and obviously with my friends at Children at Risk to continue that at the state level in Texas.
That was an awesome panel. Thank you so much, Jeannie and Paige. I really appreciate your time. Dalinda, sending the good vibes over to you.
Thanks, Linda. And, you know, Paige, I know that you said something, and Jenny, you know, Paige, I feel ya. My son is at Texas State University. This was us. We were you about a year ago. And what I found most valuable in what you've said, but not only what we felt at peace as a Latino family, is they're a Hispanic serving institution, and you look to see there is such intentionality with understanding what our Latinx children need in order to be able to go to and through college, right? Which is, it's great, they're getting in, but like you mentioned, what can we do to support them through graduation? And then Jenny, I really appreciated what you said, that the student voice and the youth voice is the most important voice. I can tell you at Boys and Girls Club of McAllen, we actually have, it's called a Think, Learn, and Create advocacy group. We took them over. It's called the Summit for America's Youth that Boys and Girls Club of America has every year. And they are trained in being able to use their youth voice. We went over to the halls of Congress, and it was a beautiful thing to see our youth speaking up for themselves and what their community needs. So thank you again. This panel was so meaningful, and let us continue to do our part to get all of our kids to and through their diploma. So thank you. And I can't believe it. It's already like 11:13, which is crazy to think about. We are headed into our final panel. And again, I want to thank our panelists. That was super great information. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our final session for today. And it's actually on increasing positive representation. Oh man, this speaks to my heart. Our speakers will highlight the importance of representation, not just in the media, but really across all of our industries and in positions of power. The Latinx community makes up almost 20% of the population, and we're growing. I know in the state of Texas, we are officially majority minority. I'm really excited to introduce you guys to our moderator, Jose Eduardo Sanchez. He is the co-founder of Tecolote, an organization that brings people together across languages and cultures to ignite collective action that transforms community. Joining us for this discussion is going to be Marcel Purdy. He's an actor, Zeke Benya, a cartoonist and storyteller, and Edward Castillo, the founder and owner of Figure It Out Agency. And last but certainly not least, that I'm really excited to hear from, is Natalie Sanchez Lopez. She is the executive director and CEO of Latino Texas Policy Center. So guys, we are really excited to end today with this incredible discussion. As we can see here, positive representation throughout every single industry.
Right. Thank you so much, Dalinda. Thanks everyone for joining us. Again, my name is Jose Eduardo Sanchez, or Jess, and I'm really excited to be moderating this conversation. And let me just tell you that being in this Zoom for the past hour has already filled me with such amazing positive representation of different Latino leaders who are doing amazing work for our community. So I just want to start with that shout out, that seeing so many people here at the front of the room speaking as experts, sharing about the work they do is really powerful. And just to set a little bit of the context, right? I know that all of our panels beforehand have touched on the importance and of representation of the Latina community. And this is something that we see across different sectors, across politics, policy, art, media, and even within our own communities. I do a lot of work around urban planning and design and anything that has to do with public infrastructure. And so the idea of the parks that are being built in our communities, the types of roads, the types of housing that's being developed, all of those pieces that are happening in communities that are majority Latino, even at that level, we are seeing sometimes such a lack of representation of folks who are not only the folks who are designing these projects, but also part of the process of engaging and creating the things that are going to impact their community literally as soon as they step outside their doors. So I think this is something that is also a huge opportunity for us, given that when we say the Latina community, really we are talking about so many different racial and ethnic groups, so many different countries, so many different languages. So while that can be overwhelming and sometimes at the same time, I think for me, it's such a great opportunity to uncover so many different stories and experiences that we are not hearing from yet or haven't heard as much from yet. So I think that's a really exciting part of the work of representation that I've seen in my own community. All right, so I know we have folks, I think Natalie might still be joining, so we might have to move around some of the questions, but I want to get started with a question first for Marcel, if you want to kick us off. And this question is about what are the challenges that you see in the entertainment industry in media to accurately represent the diversity of Latina cultures, experiences, and identities?
Hello, thanks for having me. And Gina, thanks so much for thinking of me. So of course, I can only speak from the entertainment industry and media perspective. It's been really neat to hear a lot of the speakers come before us and touching on a bunch of topics I don't really stop to think about. So it kind of makes me almost feel as though the entertainment industry is nowhere near as important, but it still has its place and it's still important. But so to answer the question, as far as challenges, as an actor, I'm based in Texas. I'm first generation American. I'm half Mexican. So I am not full Mexican, but I still very much identify with my Latina side. And so as far as, auditions, opportunities that come our way, there aren't many that come across, especially for an unknown actor, not a famously worldwide known actor, they're often very stereotypical or very one note, not a lot of layers to the characters, because I have found, and I don't know where the true, root problems are, but a lot of the times it's not being written from a Latina person. So of course, they're very much generalized views of who these people are in the world. And so a lot of the times, I think that's one of the biggest issues, is that we don't have enough representation overall within this big studios, within writers, with people just really advocating for our stories. And there's all different kinds of stories, as one of the speakers mentioned earlier, the way we relate to different nationalities, ethnicities within being Hispanic. And so there's just so many untold stories out there, but there aren't a lot of Latino writers still. There are several, but they're not maybe on the platform to be, given or being backed by, production companies or studios, and vice versa. And I think a lot of times studios don't believe that some of these projects will bring in the money. And so a lot of times I think it is just, we have to really be very specific of what kinds of roles we're going to be willing to accept as a Latina actor. And I made the decision a while back that I'm not going to do stuff that comes across that's very stereotypical, that's not going to really move us forward, or is just, it's already out there. I want us to be seen in a different way. So I have many actor friends that are, trying to do the same thing. But a lot of times it's just, we have to start writing our own things. We have to start making our own content. And at the end of the day, it's kind of a systemic problem in the industry where there are more, voices being heard, more stories being told, but it's, then we need to encourage the Latina community to go out and support these films and go watch and talk about them. And just, it's kind of a full circle thing, and we're all part of it, and we can all be part of the solution. So I guess just to answer the question again, it's coming from all different angles, and the more we can encourage people around us to write and to tell the stories, I think we can slowly start making more progress. And we have been, but there's a lot. And if we want to be seen in different ways, understood, not just seen as, the typical roles that are typically on the shows where there's like drug cartels or the janitors or I don't like using the word maid, but that, and yes, that's part of our world also, but it's not the only thing. It needs to be us that's telling the stories, writing them, pushing for them, finding people that are wanting to produce stories like this. So we have to do a lot of work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marcel. And I love that. I mean, I think that's such a powerful stance to say, I'm going to take the roles that I think are representing my community and are moving us forward, right? And I think that's why I love the title of this panel. We're talking about positive representation, because representation can exist in a lot of ways, and in ways that can also be damaging. So I think that's a really wonderful thing to hear. And I love this call that you are making to our community to also take control of creating our own and telling our own stories and creating our own media. And that's something that I have seen just in my own experience as a viewer. And I really look forward to continuing to see how folks take control, not just in front of the screen, but in the writer's room and behind the camera. And to that question, I'm going to go over to Zeke as someone who's also creating their own art or their own work. Zeke, can you tell us, how do you think that representation in media, literature, art, and pop culture contribute to changing the narrative around Latinos? And what impact do you see and hope that your own work plays in this evolution?
Thank you so much, Jose. And thank you all for the space for having me here. I'm going to send something in the chat. This is my website and my Instagram handle if you're interested in looking at my work. Yeah, I mean, I guess to go a little bit off of what was resonating with what Marcel was saying, I think that the type of stories that we're working on and that I'm working on specifically is something that I've become more aware of over the past years in working in the publishing industry. For those who don't know what I do, I'm a book illustrator. I do book covers, children's books. I mostly make book illustrations for young people. And I'm currently writing a children's book that I'll also be illustrating. And so over the years, I think that we're having this moment a little bit where there's Latinx stories that are being presented, that are being published. I mean, I guess it's across media as well, right? Like our food is very popular. But I think what I've experienced is that there's a flattening of our culture in terms of race and, class and sociopolitically, right? So like this flattening is something that I'm really interested in working towards, and something that I think that what I do as an illustrator can kind of help, because we're not a monolith, right? Like we all come from many different places. We come from different countries. We oftentimes don't even use the same terms for how we identify. I'm Chicano, I identify as Chicano. And that's something that was handed down to me from my parents, And so I think I'm really interested in creating nuance and complicating that story, complicating our stories a little bit. To Marcel's point about the typical roles that come through, there's something that I experience in publishing, which is getting contacted always about the same types of stories. So 2 or 3 years ago, while I do a lot of work with the community, with community organizations in El Paso and in Texas and along the border, I've been doing that work a lot around immigration and, various issues, community issues. I was always being contacted to make the story about the immigration book, right? And while I think it's an extremely important issue that needs a platform, that deserves, to have its space in our society, I also, don't think that it's the only story that's there. And I think that if we can complicate and contribute more stories, more types of stories, I think it's only helpful to people coming to the work that I'm making with a different experience. Also, something on that note is that I'm sometimes not the right person to be making work about that, right? Like, and knowing which projects to say no to. I've said no to like tons of projects because I just have to be honest with myself that just because I identify a particular way doesn't necessarily mean that it gives me agency to tell other people's stories that identify similarly to me or in parallel with me, right? Because of that, because we're not flat, right? Like it's not a flat culture that we're coming from. And so, I think having agency and having that space that I have now and having access to publishers and working on, books, me saying, the work that I'm making is as important as the work that I'm saying no to, because it makes space for those other people who are the right people to make that work come in there. And then it also sends a message to publishers, to people who are producing work. If you're talking about movies and animation, it sends a message that like, hey, we're the people who are making these things. We should have a little bit of agency in deciding which stories are being told. And so I think that's something that I'm interested in supporting, not only for myself, but for other people in publishing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Zeke. And I think that, I'm already hearing this through line of the power that our choices, right, as artists, as Latina artists, as Chicano artists, the power that we can have in that, and how those choices can be something that, we could go into a project that we can feel proud of, but also our choice can also open up opportunities for other ways and other stories and other folks who are doing this, this in our communities. And to me, that also makes me think about who is in those positions of power, right? And why aren't more of us in those positions of power to be able to, to understand the complexities and the nuances that you and Marcel are bringing to this work. And so my next question goes to Natalie. Natalie, if you can share a little bit more about that, following this thread of how do you think the underrepresentation of Latinos in positions of power impacts the development and the implementations of different policies?
Yes, thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Just quick background. I'm the executive director and CEO of a new organization called the Latino Texas Policy Center. Essentially, our mission is to increase Latino policymaking and political influence, right? We want to take that power back. So when you talk about power, I mean, it's super complicated, right? We always think about political power, those elected, those appointed maybe. But the reality is power in Texas is, sorry guys, as a Latina, I've got my dad calling nonstop. So if my video goes unedited, he's like, Mija, come over and help with the puppies. But political power is just a droplet, right? And unfortunately in Texas, we're so backwards isn't even the word. We're so intentionally and corrupt and discriminatory against Latinos, people of color, and against ourselves. Because I say that it's not just white politicians doing this, it's Latino politicians not stepping up and representing what they should be representing. So when you talk about power, yes, there's that, and we need people to vote. But the reality of where people are at in their current reality, you're either surviving poverty, the majority of us and Latinos in Texas, or maybe you've made it to the middle class and now you're trying to survive and hang on to being there. And you believe somehow this is it, right? So how do you get people out of that shell, out of what I call the patron syndrome, right? Which is they've ceded their power to the system. Patron meaning the oppressor, the boss. Yes, in theory, it's the white person, but we've inherited so much of that psychology that we do that to one another. We worry about ourselves. We don't worry about others. As I understand, a lot of the audience members here are nonprofits. Well, how do we actually truly work together? Collaboration is a very sensitive thing. It's a buzzword. It sounds great, but it can also be very surface level. how do we get past the risks of standing up for each other, the risks of speaking out? Because there is true retaliation in this state, right? And there's this fixed pie mentality that there's not enough resources, whether that's money, people, or time. So when we talk about power, we have to start within our collective, I'll say civil society, right? Those of us that are trying to make a difference, and everyone on this panel is part of that, right? We're someone that, regardless of where we're at economically, we are understanding the systemic landscape we're in, and we're trying to do something about it through the pathways that we have. But that means true collaboration. That means really uplifting each other, amplifying each other's voices, and pooling resources and not being afraid to do that. Sometimes we're just, yeah, I'll pause there because I could go on forever on Patron syndrome, but we'll have to write a book. Maybe Zeke, you can make it lively for children and try to.
Yes, I look forward to that book. That sounds amazing, Natalie. And thank you so much for bringing that perspective into the conversation. And I, wrote down the word solidarity that you mentioned. And I think solidarity is such an important part of increasing positive representation, because as Zeke was saying, right, we're also responsible for opening up other opportunities. And it's this idea that, sometimes it's this scarcity mentality of like, well, I might be the only, I get to be the Latino person in this, or this is my, I have to jump on this because there's only one Latino who can be in this space, or that one Latino who can be in the show or in this story. And so, that, as Natalie was saying, it comes down from this generations, from a lot of the histories that we come from. But one piece also that Natalie brought up is this idea of collaboration. And as someone who spends a lot of time online, I am always thinking about the ways that we can connect with each other within our own communities and across communities. And even just now being on Zoom and having this conversation. And on that, I want to pass the next question on to Edward. And this question is about technology. How do you think, Edward, that technology and social media can be used to amplify the voices and stories of Latina children and families?
Yeah, and just make sure y'all can hear me because I didn't get to test out earlier. But again, my name is Edward Castillo. I have a music agent, or have an agency here in Austin, but we're all over the state and all over the country. And then we have a social media website here in Austin where we tell people when, where, and what to do around town. So I live in real life and online most of the day, all day. So to answer your question, I fought really hard with technology to become where I'm at, because a lot like Zeke said earlier, when I first started out doing this, I was really pushed to do a lot of things because I'm brown. And it was almost discouraging because I was like, if you want to hand me charity, just give me charity, but don't put me in a position to fail because you think that I belong there in May and in September. Don't put me in Cinco de Mayo, don't put me in Hispanic Heritage Month. Things when I'm better than everybody else at my job. I belong there all year. I know that. So I started to, I also started to turn down projects, and I started to turn down things that were like, hey, it's May. We're going to give you the brown dollars. And I started saying no, because I belong there in February. I belong there in March. I belong there. And I started realizing like, oh, other people are coming to me those other times a year, but you won't highlight me because you're only seeing me one way. So I started to use technology by saying how normal I was to this country, how normal I was to these people. Yes, I'm brown. Yes, I'm proud. Yes, my family's been here longer than most families have been here. Yes, I'm happy to party in El Paso and always have fun in El Paso, or at Houston or Dallas or Austin. But that doesn't mean that like I'm not bigger or better than everybody else at the same time. So the way I would use technology was normalizing my story, normalizing myself, normalizing my vision for everything, and also like not being afraid of it, not being afraid of saying like, yes, I belong in this room, and maybe I'm the only one this color, but like, am I the best one in this room? Yes, I just happen to be this color. And so I would use technology in a bunch of different ways, but it was mainly to tell my story, mainly to tell my coworker's story, mainly to look for talent. Like you were saying earlier, Jose, like people who look like us. Like I accidentally only hired brown people. I didn't mean to, but a lot of my staff is brown. And it helps when we go into meetings and they're like, oh, you guys are unfortunately they see us as normal all of a sudden. And it's like, yeah, we are. Like, you want to call us a million different things and put us in a million different boxes, but we live here and we do this all day, every day. So like, we're just that. And that's how I use technology personally. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Edward, and thanks so much for highlighting that. I mean, just listening to you right now, there's this there's this energy and pride at even the language that we use, right, to talk about ourselves, how powerful that can be. And you know, I'm in a room, I'm not just the best, I'm here not just because I'm the best Latino artist, I'm here because I'm the best artist, period, right? And normalizing that. And of course, my work, I continue to be a Latino, my work can continue to be influenced by my identity. But yeah, I think this idea of normalizing within those spaces can be really important.
One thing that I like, I got a lot of feedback, or like almost negative in the beginning, was when I was working with larger brands. They would call me and they'd say, "Hey, I need a lot this person who's Latino, who's LGBTQ, who could do this, do that, and they're a photographer, this specific kind of photographer." And I'd come back and say, that person doesn't exist at the place you need them yet. But why don't we work together to hire somebody who does and hire them? Because I don't want to put somebody in that I look up to, that being that, you know, that photographer or whatever, and put them in position to fail because you expect them to be something they're not yet. And so like, I worked with a lot of brands to say like, let's hire both of them. Let's hire both of them. And why don't you encourage this younger person to be better, to grow where they're supposed to be, and not expect them to be at something they're not yet. And then eventually they will be there. But like, putting them in a position to fail because they're checking a box that you believe in, it was like, it almost hurt us, I believe. Like, it didn't help us, like, because that person would never be hired again. They would just be hired in May and September. And I really try to fight that. So those are things that I was personally working on.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Edward. In that, I mean, I think that example is something that I find really useful, or and what everyone is sharing as well, right? Or what are ways that we can also create and push for the representation that we need, that we see is important in our communities. And I'm going to turn it back to Marcel for this question. Is thinking of that, Marcel, and especially in the particular work that you do or in your industry, what are some examples of accurate representation, right? And I say accurate in parentheses or in quotes, because that, I know that can be really specific, but what are some examples of representation that you think that others should follow, and how can we get there?
Oh, wow. Okay. So really quick, I wanted to touch on something that I didn't say earlier, that it's not even just about our Latino stories. It is also like, oh my gosh, I just blanked on his name, the music producer. He just touched on saying that it's not even that we're just Latina. It's also, this is who we are. We're in the world. And a lot of the things too is when we see commercials or movies or TV shows, it doesn't accurately look like the world we live in, because the characters don't necessarily have to be a quote unquote Latina character. It can just be, they happen to be Latina and they work at the office with everybody else, but it's just this representation of our world is not accurate on the screen. So that's another thing I had wanted to touch on, that it's not always just about our culture stories and backgrounds. It's just seeing more of us on the TV, film, everywhere, or on the news, radio, everything. So, you know, the first things that come to mind for me of people that are doing it accurately or things that have come out, I mean, I will never forget the experience of going to see Coco in the movie theater, because that was, you know, and I was already older. Like, that was the first time I got to see a story like that on the big screen, and it was incredible. And the whole world loved that story. And just to show that the way that they did it, the way that they, you know, portrayed the story, the background of our, you know, history of Dia de los Muertos, everything having to do with the culture, everybody loved. People that speak English singing the songs, all kinds of things like that. The positive stories, they do get people out to watch them. And so, you know, there's, I also just recently looked, it's the number 8 grossing Pixar film that's ever come out, or 8 or 9. And that's incredible. So there's, you know, just it's slowly happening. There's people like Lin-Manuel Miranda that I absolutely love and admire everything he does. And Hamilton has nothing to do with being Hispanic or Latina in any way, but we now know who he is, even though he's done a lot of stuff before then. And then if you haven't seen In the Heights, it's another incredible movie that he made that was originally a play. And all of these things are an accurate representation to me because they're positive. They celebrate the music, the language, things like Spider-Verse, even like Miles Morales is of Puerto Rican descent, I think. And as soon as I saw it and they start speaking Spanish with no subtitles, I was like, it's incredible. Like, it's just, for me, it's an amazing thing to see. And I actually think it does start at these younger age films, because these kids get to see, oh, that's me up there. That's kind of, I relate to that. And we didn't have that growing up as much, I don't think. I mean, we did if we were watching stuff that was made in the Latin countries, you know, but not as far as, I didn't have those films when I was little to watch that were English and I could relate to me. So I think it's just, just really great to start seeing some of these artists that are really trying to put it all out there in a positive light. Have a lot of people starting to really respect their work and watch what they do next, and kids that are starting to dress up as these characters for Halloween. It's just, it's slowly coming. And the other thing I wanted to say, if you haven't seen Flaming Hot, that's another very positive story, true story. And I happen to know the actor that got to play the man who created the Flaming Hot Cheetos, but he's very much, you know, only wanting to do work that is positive. And that's just a very inspiring story of someone that came from the drug side of things to, you know, working his way up to what he did. And I say all of this because it's just so important, I think, for especially kids, but everybody in the world, to see us in a different light and not just think we're one thing that for whatever reason the media decided what it looks like or what it is, and it's not. We have so much more to us, and we have such beautiful stories. So there are great people out there that are starting to really do these things. So I just, again, I'll touch on the fact that we just need to really encourage people to go out and see these things, support the artists around us, to keep pushing, because we have a mountain ahead of us, but we can, you know, slowly chip away at it. And at the end of the day too, I was thinking, you know, I wish there was a way that we could have just kids that are maybe from lower income or don't have access to see these things somehow, to let them see these stories, because at the end of the day, we all feel, I don't know, connected through the arts, I think. And I think it could bring them some joy even in the midst of whatever they're dealing with. So if there is a way to do that, I listening to everybody, I wish there was a way we could all come together and start doing more, come up with some kind of organization to, you know, promote it and get it out there, or bring stuff to schools. And I don't know, my brain's going off with what we could start to do. So
Great,
well,
thank
and
you.
I love that. I love that so much, what you had just mentioned. And I will tell you, I think that when we talk about representation and being in spaces where we're decision makers, I want to let you know that we're really intentional at the Boys and Girls Club of McAllen to show those movies. So we actually have movie nights all during Hispanic Heritage Month to share these positive stories with our family. We give out free food. We have an evening here. And then we make sure, you know, on our walls that it's the historia for our families. And so just really highlighting all of the positive contributions that our people have given this great country. You know, for far too long, our stories are not being told. And so I super appreciate all of the work that you guys are doing in your spaces. And the other thing that sounds like is really resonating with this panel is, and something that I try to tell our teens and our youth here on the southern border is, you know, there's two things that we can be doing on social media. We can be consuming, or we can be creating. And so one, I want to thank you so much for creating. And I continue to want to make sure that we are creating and not just consuming other people's stories, but we're being intentional, brave, and bold, and creating and and also a space for our positive stories to be told. I'm super excited because we actually have a few more minutes with this panel. I don't know if anyone on our call has any additional questions. It seems like everybody's really interested in this panel with entertainment, or Jose, or anybody on this panel if you have some additional statements. But I'm getting some really positive responses with what I'm seeing on this end. So we do have a few more minutes, so we can continue with it.
I'd love to, I'd love to do a bit of a lightning round. I know Marcel, you just answered this question, but I'd love to hear from Natalie, Zeke, and Edward, sort of a continuation of what are some examples, either stories, shows, books, folks that you want to lift up as you think about representation of Latino communities.
I'll kickstart. I'm not a great person with coming up with examples like that. One, because I'm so steeped in I love pop culture, but I'm horrible at memorizing it. You give me the boring stuff like laws and policy and constitution, I've got you all day long. I think that's part of my survivor mentality, right? Figuring out what do I actually need to know. But I would say in terms of what we need to amplify, I know there was a prior panel talking about education and our statistics. I mean, part of the reason why the Policy Center is created and why public policy matters is because ultimately those are the decisions, the laws, the rules that are put in place that are going to uphold these systems of oppression, and they're either going to help us or they're going to hurt us. So that's my why for getting into this work. And so in terms of what we uphold, uphold all of us that don't fit that norm. I mean, I'm Puerto Rican, Dominican, Mexican, born and raised here in San Antonio, came from an extremely poor background, still supporting my family 100%. But I made it to Harvard somehow, right? So there's that stereotype of who goes to Harvard, or, and what do they do afterwards? But it's not enough to get to those places, right? It's enough you got to then figure out, how do you survive them? Because it is a survival. And then more than anything, how do you survive coming back home? I've only been back home for 2 years, and it is, and I think I've been gone for about 15. The pace at which we've made progress, the pace at which people have pride in themselves as Latinos or as people of color, is diminishing. I like what Zeke put. I think he said the flattening of our culture. It's a real thing that's happening, and it's easy for us to kind of just fit into mainstream. So who do we uphold? Every single person that's doing every single, thing that's not expected of us. And we really have to celebrate one another. We have to amplify each other's voices. Just because I work in the political, we'll say, advocacy realm, art is absolutely one of the main drivers that's going to make that happen. How do you reach our community? It's through our cultura, it's through art, it's through food, it's through music. So really just continuing to do things like this, and reach outside of your bounds. Don't stay in your own network of people. Reach out to the different communities. I see all of you as colleagues in this fight. So, I hope you guys will reach out to me and tell me how I can uplift what you're doing, and how we can collaborate and make this different. We have to take our power back, especially here in Texas. We're the majority and we need to start acting like it.
Yeah, if I could jump on that. Props to Natalie for going to Harvard and for taking the words out of my mouth of like supporting each other. Because I was thinking something that you had said earlier, Jose, was that we have this, it's like this idea of scarcity and the illusion of scarcity, and how we're so competitive with each other culturally. Like, it's a part of our culture to be competitive, but we always are punching laterally and not punching up, right? Or punching down and competing with each other. So in publishing and in media, in the music space, it's like, how do you be your best self, but then also come out to support other people? Because yeah, we should, to find good examples, and I'm going to hold up a book in a little bit to uplift someone, right? But it's like, because these systems of oppression are designed against us to succeed and get our stories out there, right? It turns us into competing with each other. So I try to practice non-competition, transparency with my process, right? How do I uplift younger people? Hold the door open, right? Like, it's all those terminologies of like how we uplift each other, right? And it's with mutual aid and support. So community building, to Natalie's point. And, you know, just like celebrating other people, right? Like someone else's win is not a loss for me. And I've dealt with this so much, like growing up in El Paso and like living in El Paso, like we're all trying so hard to get out of El Paso when we were younger. Everyone was trying to like get up. And so it's like, if you get up on something, someone else is going to be jealous. And it's like this whole thing, right? But how do we not work against each other and just try to celebrate other people? So on that note, an author and illustrator duo, amazing people from San Antonio, Selena Gonzalez and Adriana Garcia, they came out with Where Wonder Grows. I had the privilege of working with them on this book as an art director and a co-editor. They just came out with a new book called Remembering, and just an amazing duo. A great example of telling their own story, having their own agency to decide what their story looks like, and the unique place that they come from. And to me, authenticity is like an illusion as well. It like creates this, everyone's going to fail at the authenticity test, right? Like it's too complicated. So like, just like abandon that and like, just let's embrace all the parts of us, and how do we celebrate that? So Adriana and Selena are good friends and someone who I hope you all will support.
That's so awesome. Thank you. And yeah, thanks for bringing that book to light, because it is super important. And I don't know about anybody else, but I got like a surge of enthusiasm when Natalie just dropped that, like, let's start acting like we're the majority. So I don't know on y'all's end, but I'm really excited. I know we have quite a bit of applauses that were going up. I definitely felt empowered. So thanks for dropping that, as well as all of the work. Representation does matter in all spaces. And what I would also say is that we need to be intentional with bringing people alongside with us, that when we are moving up as a Latino community, let's be sure to mentor and bring a few people and collect everyone together. That is how we're going to be able to maximize our impact. So I do want to take a second and thank you guys so much for showing up in the spaces and for representing it. At times, I'm sure is extremely difficult. So again, thank you so much. I do want to remind all of our guests again that all of this information and the slide deck and all of the contact information for many of our panelists today will be in your email here pretty shortly. So I'm going to go ahead and draw us to a close. It's actually a little tough to close that off because I'm actually really enthused to hear a little bit more from some of our panelists, but I do want to take a second and thank everybody for, giving of your time and understanding the value of, let's talk about how we can bring impact to our Latine children across the globe. And so I'm starting, of course, in our home. Also, it's important that we take a second, right? And we reflect on the invaluable insights that we share and the dialogues that were sparked even today. Let them not stop. Let's also be intentional with connecting with each other. And really, we find ourselves, again, as we talk about the majority minority in Texas, we find ourselves kind of standing at the intersection of awareness and action. So I'm sure all of us today took one thing that we can act on, that there was an awareness that was created here today and that we can move forward with acting on that. Our journey actually, it has been complicated in the past, but through these sessions, it's nothing been short of transformative, right? So again, let's take this awareness piece and let's act on it. So on behalf of Children at Risk, on behalf of Jaritos that showed up and sponsored this great summit, I want to thank you so much. Gracias. Thank you so much for joining us.